Hey, Gelsey, thanks so much for talking with me today. So, you were my student here at SDSU, a sociology major, graduated in 2017, and then you went on to a master's degree in higher education. And your current job title, can you tell me that title?
Yes, professional development manager.
Professional Development Manager, which is an academic administrator role in the student affairs realm. And so your MA connected right to your career path. But before we get to your journey to where you are now, can you tell us just a little bit, what does somebody with a role like yours do? What's a typical day look like?
Thank you for the question and for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. So yeah, in my role, my role is called a professional development manager. So I work at the University of San Diego's Knauss School of Business. And just a little bit of background for your student listeners. The University of San Diego, that's a private Catholic college, one of the colleges here in San Diego. Oftentimes we confuse it with UC San Diego. Much larger public institution. I work in the Knauss School of Business Student Success Department, which encompasses both the Office of Academic Advising and the Office of Professional Development. My role sits in the Professional Development Office, which functions like a dedicated career center, exclusively serving business students, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. I would say is very complementary, but also very separate from a career center that most colleges have on campus that service the wider student community across the campus. So ours is unique in that way. I'm a part of a team around 8 other professional development managers, each assigned to supporting different business student majors and programs. Our team specializes in providing customized, tailored career and professional development support services to our populations.
Is the career center that you have there at the School of Business for undergrads as well, or is it mainly for your MBA students?
The Career Center within our university services just undergraduate students and not graduate. However, the Career Center in the Knauss School of Business, which is separate, the one I work in, services both undergraduate and graduate business students.
And I've seen that this is not uncommon at different institutions, that some departments will have an additional career center. I'm curious, for students who are still picking majors, how much of a difference does that additional departmentally based career services make for students compared to students who only have the broad central career center?
I think both are beneficial. I appreciate and value our broader career services center. They've been on campus for many years. They have been inspirational for our department in developing our programming and services. We collaborate closely together. It's nice for students because the fact that they get assigned, like once they declare a major. So for example, I support students majoring in international business or supply chain management. They get connected to career readiness resources specific to that major. So it is really helpful. But of course, you have to be a student who wants to take advantage and leverage those resources that we have. For example, I help support a mentorship program that connects students within those majors to a mentor who works in a specific career path of international business. I might put on career panels that are made up of panelists who work in different international business fields. I'm the student advisor to the International Business Club, who also bring in different alumni and employer representative guest speakers to certain events. So it's just really helpful for connecting students to their specific industry or path. And yeah, and I think a career services center, again, it's more generalized. So it's going to focus on providing support services like career fairs that could be hiring students, not just in the School of Business, but in any school within the university, bringing in for-profit companies and nonprofits. It's serving the wider community.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, it's more specialized and focused. You're saying that you can connect them with a mentor. My own research and other literature shows how powerful having a mentor is, and yet a small fraction of students say that they have a mentor. So the idea that you can help connect people to those and offer that focus. Do you feel like a lot of students just take for granted or don't take advantage of the resources available to them on campus? I know that happens broadly in terms of the Central Career Center, but do you get a higher participation rate in your department?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we're definitely increasing our participation rate just because the School of Business, our department has been around only for 3 to 4 years. So we're still trying to get our brand out there to students. It's definitely increasing. Appointment rates are definitely increasing. In our office, we call it frequent flyers. We often see the same students over and over again. We're really trying to ensure that our services are reaching as many students as possible. But yeah, I would say we just seen through the data we've collected on employment outcomes that students who take advantage of it's not just career readiness resources, but any resources on campus are more likely to be able to, at least if they take advantage of our resources, land that first full-time career position. Attended our networking events, met with their PD, they participated in our mentorship program, they attended our career readiness events, etc. We've just seen that those students have been able to land that internship or full-time job opportunity. It definitely shows.
And I could especially imagine for first generation to college students whose families may not have that social capital or cultural capital that you guys are helping provide a lot of that. So that's incredible. I had just to go step back a moment, the day to day. So if somebody lands a job like yours, you show up on a Monday or a Tuesday, is every day different? Is it a lot of meetings? What does a services professional do?
Of course. And I think it's important for me to give a background about what I do in my role and what that looks like. A PDM, we specialize in providing customized career and professional development services to our students. I support international business students and supply chain management students with their career growth. My role can really be divided into three parts. The first part is providing one-on-one career coaching services. I'm meeting one-on-one with students throughout the day and providing them education on career topics as it relates to their major. So we do things like mock interviews, resume writing. I talk about what opportunities are available in their major as it relates to career readiness, maybe an event or a program, and I'm encouraging them to be a part of it. Interview preparation, just all kinds of things. It's very customized to the student. I advise multiple student organizations, business organizations, where I'm regularly meeting with the student executive board members, the students who are actually running these organizations, putting on the various events. They're reaching out to alumni for speaker engagements. I'm helping them navigate those daily responsibilities, providing training, focusing on larger scale programming efforts within the School of Business, arranging company site visits and tours, or what we call company treks. I run a mentorship program. There's a lot that's all year long. So there's a lot that goes into that. Yep. I would also say, serving as an advisor for student case competitions and actually traveling with those students to those different engagements. Wow. But a typical day is a mix of things. I would say that some of it is fairly consistent and structured. Some things are really unplanned and unpredictable. And I think that's very normal for any job. So there's definitely some pivoting and problem solving that I'm doing on the day to day. Normally, I'm responding to student, staff, or faculty emails in the morning, which is followed by a PDM or team meeting or student appointments, then followed by lunch or preparing for a student organization event or an event that the whole PDM team is putting on, usually in the middle of the day. Following that, just more student appointments or me doing a lot of behind the scenes administrative work, preparing for a company site visit. I'm sending out email blasts to our students about upcoming events or internships I think they should take advantage of. So yeah, that's pretty much what my day looks like.
Varied set of skills.
Yeah,
coaching,
definitely a dull day.
Some marketing and the event planning, administrative work, very varied.
And I work, go ahead.
Oh, so this isn't the job you immediately got when you graduated. Mm-hmm. How did you determine, it looked like your internships, did you start interning in student affairs while you were an undergrad?
So I interned in student affairs in the Office of Advising and Evaluations at SDSU. Okay.
So you asked me to write you a letter for a grad program in higher ed. 7 years later, you were consistent with that. I've seen a lot of students meander before they land. So I'm curious about the trajectory you took to get to where you are. Can you speak to any of the knowing versus not knowing as an undergrad? Obviously, there's benefits to having what appears to be a straight path. Maybe you'll tell me it wasn't a straight path.
Yeah. Definitely. That's a great question. You could say that my career path has actually been fairly linear, which is not very common. I'm trying to encourage students to embrace that. I knew what I wanted to do career-wise early on, even though I had no idea what that career would look like. I realized I wanted to work in higher education almost immediately during my first semester at Mesa Community College. I hadn't even declared a major yet. And so I remember having a conversation with a counselor who was helping me choose a major. I said I could see myself working in higher education, maybe as a counselor. I wasn't quite sure. He suggested I declare a major in sociology. This conversation, along with the strong connection I felt to the campus, was really influential, even though I didn't yet understand the specific career paths in higher education. I truly had no idea.
Sure, a lot of administrative and roles. Right.
Absolutely.
A lot of students don't realize that they'll see their faculty and maybe an office staff person, but there's layers and several departments of administrative roles. So,
Yeah. There are academic affairs, student affairs, institutional research, faculty positions. I think that's something I certainly learned more about when I went into my graduate program, but that was definitely a later discovery. Going back to your question.
so one, how did you know? It sounds like you're lucky enough to have a vision for what you wanted early on, and then you followed that through. But then what was the journey from graduating undergrad to where you are today? I know you had different roles across that journey.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it was really helpful because participating in those hands-on learning opportunities outside of the classroom really help you discover what career path you want to pursue. I was lucky that I was able to have my internships and grad assistantships or hands-on learning opportunities in the same place as where I was securing my education from. So it was very convenient. Over those 6 years, both as an undergraduate and graduate student, I explored many different roles in higher education. The most pivotal moment for me was all the graduate assistantships that I pursued in my graduate programs. And I think just for your students listening, a graduate assistantship, it's similar to an internship, but they're tailored more towards graduate students and they're oftentimes facilitated between different universities and their departments and the actual graduate program. I participated in so many different kinds of assistantships to gain that well-rounded perspective. I worked in an office of student life and leadership at San Diego State University, which introduced me to program management, leadership, and workshop development. Working in an academic advising office at San Diego State University exposed me to advancing my communication skills, especially interpersonal, being able to understand academic policy. I was able to facilitate different workshops, enhance my overall advising skills. Working in an assessment and evaluation office at UC San Diego, definitely gaining skills in, of course, assessment, and also, again, enhancing my workshop development skills. So yeah, I think all of those contributed to my learning and growth as a student affairs professional, but the broad exposure was critical. Even after completing those assistantships, I was still deciding what I wanted to go into. It was really 1 to 4 years after graduating from my master's where I became confident in my skill sets, strengths, and knowing what I wanted to do. I'm happy to elaborate on that more though.
No, that's fantastic. So it almost sounds like three phases: the internships and graduate assistantships. Were those mostly unpaid, or are there a lot of paid opportunities for students?
Totally. So it definitely depends on what you want to pursue. In higher education, they're almost always paid. It's not going to be the highest pay. I would say it was very standard, but they certainly weren't unpaid.
And then that moved you into evaluation assessment, which you went to UC San Diego to do. And the role at USD was specifically in the Department of Business, right, as part of their career development.
Yes, exactly. Held different graduate assistantships in advising, student life and leadership, and assessment at SDSU and UC San Diego as a graduate student. Then I graduated and worked in an advising office at UC San Diego and transitioned into my current position as a professional development manager at the University of San Diego.
So that's at least four different kinds of higher education administrative roles. Is it common for students who want to go into higher ed or get an MA in higher ed? I know there's so many different departments and pathways. Is it common that folks start to really identify with a certain component of student affairs versus outreach and university advancement? Or do people tend to, do you see these kind of horizontal movements? Because you had multiple evaluation, advising, and then career development. How common is it for students, if they want to follow a path like yours, to be able to move in different directions versus when you start specializing?
Yeah, it's very common to move in different directions. So again, that general idea of wanting to work in higher ed, I think gets planted when you're an undergrad or graduate student. And when you go into your career, that's really where a lot of movement into different types of positions and figuring out what you want to do. Maybe it's even outside of student affairs and higher ed that you might want to explore. So it's extremely common. For example, for me, coming out of my graduate program into an advising position at a large public institution, and then transitioning into career services at a small private university, very different. And also, I didn't even have any experience in career services. So you can see that exploration was still happening. But yeah, it's very normal. There's all kinds of positions you go into, like academic advising, career counseling, residence life, being a student activities coordinator. So yeah, with my peers in my master's program, I've definitely seen a lot of pivoting more so than students just sticking to the same type of career path in student affairs.
I can imagine it being useful because then you understand how the other departments you're interfacing with work if you've done a tour in different ones over time.
It definitely is, and seeing the cross collaboration between the schools and various departments. But yeah, it's very normal.
I think some people don't understand that universities, they're almost like small cities, and there's all these little departments and silos, and it's not as top down as people might think. Learning to navigate that bureaucracy, even at a mid-sized school like you're at, there's still a lot there. I think students, when they're undergrads, may not realize how complex and decentralized universities are.
Definitely. Yeah.
What key skills did you find most useful when you were transitioning from student to professional? Were the things you learned in or out of class as an undergrad that you were really grateful for? Or maybe that you were like, oh gosh, I wish I had learned that sooner, that you had to pick up quickly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think obviously I'm just going to be speaking to my experience and the student affairs world. In terms of skill sets, I think a lot of that develops from hands-on learning experiences in my graduate assistantships. With student affairs, especially with entry-level roles, I wouldn't say they're necessarily expecting candidates to have a lot of hard skills. They have experience with program management, event planning, and advising or counseling for X number of years. I'm talking about an entry-level position. So I think they're prioritizing more soft skills and also just a passion for higher education, student affairs leadership over the hard skills, which really can be learned on the job. For example, my first job out of graduating from my master's was an academic advisor. For those types of jobs, they're really just looking for a bachelor's degree and some experience, a student affairs department or setting on a college campus, or even having some student leadership experience. But I think my internships and grad assistantships really helped me get that full-time position by just having that on my resume. And like in advising, you need to be someone who has really good communication skills, especially interpersonal, because you're doing a lot of student-facing work. Someone who's organized, is able to interpret, understand institutional policy and communicate that to students. I think just having a wide variety of, as much as you can, like any kind of basic office admin experience, leadership, advising, it depends on the role you're applying to. The requirements are pretty general. It is really common in higher ed for staff or administrators to pursue master's degrees. You don't need it in the field, but it's very common. If you work in a higher education setting, they oftentimes provide for full-time employees tuition reimbursement if you want to continue your course of study. And that's a huge draw. I would recommend pursuing a master's if you want to work in higher ed student affairs leadership. I recommend the SDSU leadership program.
Your alma mater?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so when you're working in higher ed, it's one of those unique areas where it's hard to be overqualified. It's an environment of advanced degrees. So even if skills you're using don't require it, it really doesn't hurt because lots of people have master's degrees and maybe even eventually EDDs and PhDs. And I think in some fields you can get that master's degree, have no work experience, and that could almost harm you. But this is not one of those areas where having a master's degree looks bad in any way.
Definitely. Yeah, because I went straight from undergrad into my master's and held different internships. That was fine for me. Higher education is definitely filled with a lot of high achievers. That's very common for them to want to keep continuing their education.
Okay.
But I can elaborate that.
If somebody does want to work in student affairs, with whatever department or division within that, is the most common credential then after your undergrad a master's in higher ed or post-secondary like leadership?
I've seen a lot of masters in higher ed leadership with an emphasis in student affairs, or just higher ed leadership, or masters in counseling. Those are the three most common that I've seen. Doesn't mean that's what you have to pursue, but if you're working as an administrator in student affairs or see yourself in a leadership position in student affairs, that's what's most commonly pursued from most of my colleagues that I've seen.
Are there many, so say somebody already has a master's in a different area, but they want to retool for this, or they want to get something to really position themselves specifically towards this. Are there like certificates in higher ed?
It depends on the functional area that you want to go into, but higher ed's pretty big on that. There's definitely a lot of trainings and certifications that you can pursue. I know right now I'm pursuing a training in career coaching, which I should have done a long time ago. Those are definitely opportunities you could pursue, especially if it's a field you're brand new to. It's recommended you pursue that certification as early on as possible, just as you're building your skill set. I think making sure that your department or manager offers those types of professional development opportunities, which are usually provided and encouraged, especially in a higher education setting. Like with my field, we're a part of some kind of professional association that's tied to whatever area of student development we're supporting. Obviously, mine's in career services. Our department's a part of multiple professional associations.
What are some professional associations that you would recommend to students interested?
So there's definitely a wide range. I'm a part of MPACE and NCDA. I apologize. I should know ever since I started my career, my team and I attend those conferences on an annual basis, multiple days of training sessions and workshops on different topics in that functional area, exchanging best practices and knowledge. Having the opportunity to present at one of those workshops is usually given to the staff in our department. Professional development is very encouraged in higher education. Participating in lifelong career development and learning is critical. Learning doesn't end when you get your degree. It's important to keep your mind fresh and keep learning throughout your career to stay relevant in your skill set.
Awesome. I ask all of my interviewees for advice to undergrads, especially those nearing graduation and really thinking about the job market. What would you say to students who might want to follow a trajectory just like yours, but also like broad advice for the current cohort and the job market's always changing?
Absolutely. I have a lot of advice that I can share. This is something I talk about every day with my students. Transitioning from college to career is incredibly daunting and intimidating for students of the traditional age between 18 and 22. Going into a career after their undergraduate degree is intimidating because academics is something they've known their whole life, and now they're going into brand new terrain that they're unfamiliar with. So I just want to first acknowledge that the job market is competitive and tough right now to navigate, and just being real about that with the students. I think my main piece of advice is really trying to encourage students to take advantage of career readiness and development as early as possible in their academic career, which is tough because they're transitioning into college, but getting them to participate in hands-on learning opportunities like internships, even from when they start as a freshman or sophomore, and gaining those skills and exposure to the career world throughout their college years is really helpful. I can definitely say that these internships and grad assistantships were really critical in preparing me for the job world, but making me more competitive in it as well. That definitely helped me secure my first position. It doesn't mean, you have to have as many internships as I did, by no means.
You had like 2 years worth?
Pardon me?
You had about 2 years worth of internships and assistantships.
Yes, that's right. So I think it was like 2.5 years, but yes, you are correct in that. It feels like more years, but I think I just did a lot during that time. Finding that transferable work experience is important, but you don't necessarily have to participate in internships. These can be early career programs, rotational programs, job shadowing from a mentor, volunteer experience. So that's where your career center is going to be really helpful in helping you understand what you can pursue outside of the classroom. Tailoring your application materials to the jobs or internships you're applying for as much as you can. And what I mean by application materials are like your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn. So making sure that they're really polished and clean and professional. They have relevant skills that are needed. Like leaning in on your career center to help you with that, or having others like peer review those documents to make sure they look good for those applications. So I have other tips. Do you want me to keep going?
Sure. Earlier you mentioned there's application tracking software now. I'd love for you to touch on that briefly. And how tools like ChatGPT can be helpful, but also when you see a resume that they just lazily had written for them, how that can be detrimental as well. Some of that tech stuff as well.
Yeah. So AI is here and it's here to stay. And it's definitely important for our students to, obviously, they're very aware of it, but understanding what that looks like as an applicant for these jobs. So many companies are leveraging AI software to do resume screening. Maybe a student listening has submitted an application before and they got some type of, automatic email back to them, like saying their resume has been denied or they moved forward, and it looked like it was coming from a robot. That's AI being used, where it was essentially screening your resume for keywords against the job description and determining whether or not it makes it through. So it's important to leverage softwares so there's something called JobScan, which our department uses, and we give our students access to, that leveraging AI software that can screen against those job descriptions to help you get through that system, I think is really important. But that's also why it's so important to use keywords on the job description in your resume so it can help you get through that system.
Say keywords. You're talking about keywords from the job description of what the qualities or qualifications the applicant should have. Would you recommend it, say a student's kind of new and they don't know what keywords are the most important? Would that be the kind of thing they could paste the job description in, say ChatGPT, and ask it what the keywords are? Or?
You absolutely can. So you can definitely leverage ChatGPT for things like that. And it can certainly tell you what keywords should I have on my resume. That's excellent advice for sure.
So is there anything else you want to, before I shift away from the tips?
Yeah, I think just a couple more things. I want to make a comment for students, trying not to put so much pressure on yourself when it comes to career readiness and preparation. Having ambition is really important, but for a lot of students, they feel pressure to have their dream job landed by the time they graduate, or they need to have it all figured out. I think it's just important to understand that career exploration is going to continue happening 1 to 5 years out from graduation. And I also want to make a comment about careers in student affairs, maybe some things I didn't necessarily know when I went into it. A lot of people go into student affairs not to make a high salary. This is service-oriented work. So people are going into it because they're passionate about student success and development. And that's what's motivating and driving them rather than the salary. So just understanding those expectations going into it, but also knowing that if you work in higher ed, there's just a lot of other added benefits, usually like healthcare is a lot more affordable, which is really nice. I talked about the tuition reimbursement already. It's also a wonderful community to be part of. There's so much energy and passion. But I think just understanding that too. Oftentimes we work really hard as student affairs professionals, but that comes from the fact that this is very service-oriented work and we're willing to put in that amount of time and energy to support our students.
Yeah, and
yes, yeah.
Those things would definitely make a difference. I wanted to ask what role either a social network or mentor or knowing someone at one job or another, did any of that play a part? There's the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know to get a job. Was that part of your story or not so much?
That's a good question. I got access to a network of individuals through my grad program. I was placed in these graduate assistantships, and those supervisors didn't just act as supervisors to me, but also as mentors. They specifically wanted to hire graduate assistantships from this program because they wanted to support development. I was fortunate to feel like I had 4 to 5 mentors who were my supervisors throughout those 2 years. I wouldn't say I leveraged that. I did maybe for references for a job, but I didn't leverage that to get my first position. I was an external candidate. I didn't know anyone in the department and happened to get the position. It's very common these days. I support business students. Networking is huge in the business world. To have connections is crucial, but it's important to understand the goal isn't to get a job out of it. That could occur and that's great, but networking is get knowledge from someone who has more years of experience in a certain industry or field that you can learn from. And maybe that could eventually turn into a job opportunity one day, but understanding that's not necessarily the goal is important for students to understand.
And in that form of networking, you're talking about LinkedIn, networking events, informational interviewing, I imagine, when you're not trying to land a job specifically, but you're building connections within the chosen field.
So like you say, networking events are really critical for establishing those relationships, leveraging your LinkedIn network for sure. I'm thinking about my mentorship program, and that oftentimes these mentors connect students to other professionals in the field that they can learn from. Yeah, just understanding it's not like a transactional thing. Yeah, like I said, it could be land into a job, who knows, but that's not necessarily the overarching goal of the relationship.
It's relational for the purpose of learning.
Yes.
And additional benefits over time may come. In the beginning of this interview, I was saying how you were unique in that you had this almost straight line, knowing what you wanted to work in higher ed and then going right into a master's program and multiple roles in that. I tell my students sometimes you don't have to pick a job title, like start with picking a field or two to learn about. Even though you knew you wanted to be in higher ed and then at some point in student affairs, you've still had several different specific roles and titles and departments within that. And so can you speak to the strategy of you need to have something you're moving toward, but it doesn't have to be this really specific kind of job title, right? Picking a field at least allows you to be training towards something.
Definitely. That's what I advise on every day with my students. For example, international business, there's so many different functional areas. I'm just going to give an example of how I coach a student. They say they love their marketing class. And I say, well, maybe the functional area of international marketing and international business might be of interest. Maybe just try looking for some marketing internships with even domestic companies and just try a general marketing internship that might expose you to digital marketing, communications, and PR. You could get a well-rounded understanding of all those areas. It starts out very general. They have different interests, right? And that's the challenge, picking one. That's why I say if I have a student interested in marketing and finance, do a marketing internship your sophomore year, then do a finance one your junior year. See which one you like. And just making sure they also take classes that are diverse is important to help define what they want to do.
Right. And learn what they don't want to do.
Don't want to do.
Also,
which is, I love it when a student comes to me and says, oh my gosh, I can't stand accounting. And I'm like, great, that's wonderful. That's something you can just check off.
Right. What's next for you? You had multiple roles and you've been growing over the short number of years since you graduated. And I'm sure your journey has many destinations yet. What do you envision or hope for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm about 5 years out from graduating from my master's program, maybe a little less. And I think it's a very natural transition for me right now to think about what I want to do next. And it's been lovely working as a student affairs practitioner. It's something I've very much enjoyed. But I think, and this has honestly been a goal of mine, I got this seed planted in my head. I think, honestly, when I was a sociology undergraduate student at SDSU, I see myself going into teaching or research in some capacity. I've always wanted to pursue a PhD in higher ed leadership. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but I was intentional with wanting to gain more practical student affairs experience after I graduated. I had been in college for 6 years. I was ready to get into the career world and experience that. But I see myself being pulled back toward academics. I can see myself being an education researcher or teaching some type of leadership course. Figured out exactly what that's going to look like. I'm in the very beginning stages. I have a meeting scheduled with a counselor at the University of San Diego to talk about their PhD leadership program. I was telling Dr. Davis that I wanted to chat with him about his experience with that, but that's where I see myself. I still want to work in higher education.
And then they have the tuition remission to help you can keep your job while working on these kinds of, and this is one of those areas where that's a bit unique. If you want to be a full-time faculty, you get your PhD to get the job. In higher ed administration, they value that you have the work experience before you get the PhD. And unlike doctor or lawyer, you got to have the degree before you can do the thing. This is one unique area where it really benefits you to have worked in higher ed admin before faculty for people that want to go into higher ed.
Definitely. I think it's a component they do value, probably more so for an EDD, because they're focusing on you being a practitioner in higher education, where a PhD is more focused on the research side of things. I wouldn't say I definitely have a little bit of background in research, but I wouldn't say too much. That's something I probably need to focus on developing more.
Has
the assessment.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's maybe not academic research in the sense that we think of when we think of sociologists publishing a journal article, but a lot of the same skills of surveying and data analysis. And
I think I'm selling myself short a little bit, but that's definitely something I see myself doing. All the workshops I facilitated in the past on professional development, I think that's really what sparked the interest in teaching. I love being able to educate an audience or a group on a topic that I think is interesting and I think they find interesting. I just think it's very influential work. We'll see, but that's the next step. And I will also say for students not wanting to maybe work in higher ed, some companies will fully pay for a graduate degree or other certifications. A lot of MBA students have their companies like fully pay for their degrees. So just thinking like for students who want to work somewhere else outside of education, but you want to continue your education, maybe your companies could reimburse.
Yeah, and consider that as an important perk when you're applying. Fantastic. I think this speaks to the kind of lifelong learning that is important in your field, and you're definitely embodying that. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your wisdom. This, I think, is really helpful. I appreciate it a lot.
My pleasure, Dr. Davis. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope your students find this information useful. I'm happy to speak with any of them if they have any questions. Thank you.
Again.